They've been saying to him, all hail Sam Hale, ever since he was playing tackle football as a child. But as you're going to find out here in my conversation with him, they say that in other areas of his life, considering what he's doing as a dad and what he's doing in the workspace and sports media as well. This is the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel and Fox Sports Radio. Sam Hale, of course, my guest. You know him as coordinating producer at Stadium, one of the up and coming powerful sports media brands and networks in the game today. Sam, excited to have you on.
Well, I'm happy to be here. That's quite the intro. Uh,
Well, this is just the start here. It's going to continue to get better and better. And, for someone like yourself who played some tackle football, what were you like as a tackle football player as a kid?
I didn't play till eighth grade because my parents didn't want us doing it. So I played soccer, baseball, all the other sports growing up. Uh, Eighth grade I played a little in ninth grade, and then I stopped in high school. I just kind of, I was early on, I didn't like getting hit. Then I played again my junior year. And, as the kid that hadn't played for a few years, it took a while to get in, but played a little of everything: tight end, D end, linebacker. I was the long distance kicker who had one attempt. It was a 47 yarder right before halftime, and it fell about 13 yards short and about 10 yards wide left. Uh, so, yeah, for a guy who was 6'5", I was super skinny in high school. So, um, I can't say I was the best player, but I don't think I was the worst. And then the summer before my senior year of high school, my dad was in the oil field, so we moved out the country. We actually moved to Indonesia,
Wow.
to Jakarta, and we knew that was happening. So I didn't do like spring football that year of my junior year because I was like, well, I'm not going to be here. And then we moved back 3 days before my senior year of high school started because of my dad oil field politics stuff. And I just said, yeah, I probably won't be a starter if I'm not here 3 days before the season. So yeah, I didn't play a ton, but my kids are both playing now. My youngest son is 10, my oldest is 12. His team's got a bye this week for the playoffs for their league they're in, and it's both of their first years playing, and I see a little of myself in them, from that first year I played to not so much wanting to get contact, but getting better and better as it goes on. So yeah, my career as a player, I don't think I was that great, but I had fun.
How much are they playing?
Uh, my oldest plays corner, so he plays probably right now about half the game um, of the defensive snaps, maybe a little more. He's playing some wide receiver now too. So he's probably playing between half and like three-quarters of the game. And then my youngest, when he was playing, he'd play, most of the game. He's an offensive lineman because he has the size I have now. And my oldest has the size I had when I was younger. So my youngest is skinny. My oldest is kind of built like a brick house, and my youngest is skinny. So yeah.
If they saw you kick that one field goal in high school that landed, as you said, 13 yards short and 10, 20 feet wide or yards wide, what would they
Yeah,
say to you?
they'd have probably laughed at me. Uh, I still to this day pretend it was blocked. I think it was more of that because I hadn't had a field goal attempt. I wasn't thinking I'd be called on, so we ran out there, and I think we put the holder tee probably about just 5 yards behind instead of 7, and yeah, uh, I think they just laugh at me. I like to think I have a great relationship with my kids to where, they can open up to me about anything, and yeah, they'd probably laugh at me and make fun of me for it.
What do you want them to get out of their upbringing?
I mean, everyone says, they want their kids to be happy, so there's that, but I also kind of want to have them realize the real world, and just be ready for life. I do want them to have fun, enjoy themselves. Uh, the good thing is they both seem to be happy. We've moved a few times, as the TV business has you do, in their lives, but luckily it was when they were young. I've been here for 8 years. So most of their life has been in Chicago, even though I had never lived above Dallas before we moved to Chicago. Uh, but yeah, I think they have a great life. They do a week with me, a week with their mom, and they seem to be really happy. So I want them to basically just grow up and be happy.
You want them to be able to, as you said, navigate that real world. And as we look at sort of your life and where it went after that Hall of Fame high school kicking career that you had, and the way in which you were able to sort of navigate the real world, and sort of to bring up a metaphor, and Sam Hale is with me, coordinating producer at Stadium. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel. The idea that, metaphorically, you would be lining up for more kicks and having to deal with life's incoming rush, trying to block those kicks. But what was it about the mentality of you coming into college and beyond that had this determination to say, I'm going to make it in this business?
Yeah, I think it was really mid college and beyond. I was the student that LSU has the reputation for early on. Uh, I got out of home and basically had a lot of fun my first year and a half in college. And then, my grades weren't the greatest. So I left and I went and worked in the oil field. My dad, as I said, was oil field. So I got a job as a roustabout in a warehouse in Venice, Louisiana, which is like the mouth of the river. Uh, and it was loading and unloading boats, mixing chemicals, restacking pallets of material. My first week, you worked week on, week off. And my first week was 136 and a half hours for my paycheck.
Oh
Um,
my God.
so that was a huge wake up call for me as a kid that had just pretty much tried to kind of coast through his first year and a half of college. Um, so yeah, that was a big wake up call. Then I decided, you know what, I don't want to do this the rest of my life if I don't have to. Um, and I loved everybody I worked with down there. But I basically went back to school, did community college for a year, went back to LSU, and then when I got back to LSU, it was, all like 3.5s and above every semester. That was kind of my wake up call, and then I fell in love with TV kind of accidentally. I always liked sports. I played intramurals all through college. I played, in like a men's soccer league for a year just to, because I loved soccer my whole life too. And I think it was kind of while I was just watching Sports Center one day, believe it or not, and I was like, "Oh, that would be pretty cool to do." So then, like Saturday mornings when I'd wake up, I'd literally watch an episode of Sports Center the full hour. Then, that was when they would re-air them 3 times in a row, and I would watch and watch and watch and be like, "Oh, well," and try and figure out why did they do this? Why did they do that? Uh, I did that probably for the last year and a half of the time I was in college. And when I graduated, just said, yeah, I kind of want to do this. And like a little of everybody, I wanted to be on air when I first came out, and then started realizing, oh, the only on air offer I've gotten was for like 12 grand a year. And
Yeah.
they told me they'd pay me mileage on the car that I drove so that it would be more than that. And I realized that scam. Uh, so I worked my way into producing, and I kind of learned from some really great people. My internship my last semester in Baton Rouge was with these two guys, Steve Schneider and Jacques Doucette. And then the reporter photographer, James Verrett. And all three of those guys were just so awesome to me. And Bryan, the other guy I interned with. Um, I feel like a lot of people say too, they learn more in their internship than they do in their 4 years in their degree, excuse me. But yeah, those guys taught me a lot about the reality of the business, about what you put in is what you get out. And then I went to New Orleans and interned again because I couldn't get a job. And, I feel like TV kind of, you have to love this job to do it because you're working on, weird hours and holidays, weekends. And I feel like kind of who you learn from as you're going through kind of helps you navigate that path.
What do you want people to learn from you in how you tell your story about how you navigated your path?
Yeah, I think sorry.
You're
Uh,
good.
I think the thing that kind of people can that I want to learn from me is I did a little of everything. And I feel like if you learn how to do everything in this business, it'll make it a lot easier for you. Uh, like I mentioned that I interned a couple places. I was a part-time PA making 650 an hour, really being a sports producer at the station in New Orleans. Um, and then to be full-time, I became a news editor. Then I became a news writer, then a weekend news producer. And like a lot of people in sports, I hated news just because it's kind of depressing. Uh, then you know, the big thing I want people to learn from me is kind of learn a little of everything. So you know that the jobs you think might be easy really aren't. And the jobs, and you'll understand what you need to get to those people to do those jobs. And also, one of the things I take kind of into my management style is I try to manage more for my staff than I do for the company. And that sounds weird, but I always look at it as if people are happy doing their jobs, they're going to do a better job. So, I'm always staffing things in the correct way for the company. But uh, like I tell everybody, if you need a mental health day, let me know and I'll figure it out. Or if you need to take time off, we'll figure a way to make it happen if it's something that has to happen. So, like right now, I kind of do a little of everything at Stadium. In the last 3 weeks, I've probably produced 2 shows, just so producers could have days off at the same time. Uh, I basically, I just kind of want everybody, I mentioned earlier, I want my kids to grow up happy. I kind of want everyone around me everywhere I kind of am to be living their best life possible. So I try to take that into my management style. So hopefully that's what everyone would learn from me. I've learned throughout my career that when I haven't been happy doing my job, it hasn't been the best my work. So I try to make sure everybody around me is and there's going to be the times it's not going to be, and it's going to be high stress, and but that's just kind of because it's TV and it's live.
What's triggered, Sam, that empathy gene, that sensitive side, that understanding that you have?
Yeah, I think it was my kids. Having kids kind of really changes you because I know for a fact that I was kind of a jerk sometimes when I was growing up. I didn't mean to be, and I didn't think I was being. I just look back at some of the things I've done in my life, whether it was, relationships, kind of just pushing only for me and not really anyone else around me. But I think once you have kids, and you've talked about this some with some other people on your podcast too, is that it really kind of changes your outlook on the world because you're not just living for yourself anymore and you're living for them. Um, and I really think that's kind of been what it was, is that I see, when I look at like a 23-year-old kid that's working for me now, I kind of look at that kid almost not as like they're my son, but I see,
Yeah.
well, I hope someone treats my son like this when he gets into the workforce,
Wow.
as opposed to, okay, well, we need to get this done. I don't care if they have to, work 6, 7 days straight or whatever it is. So yeah.
How often do you think about your kids when you're working?
Oh, all the time. I'd lose my mind if I didn't. you know, I look at it as whenever you start to feel stressed or, frustrated, try and think of something like a happy thought. And that's almost always my kids. Every now and then it's the Saints winning the Super Bowl or LSU winning a title. Those Joe Burrow years at LSU, the 2019 year, that was my happy place a lot.
So I saw you tweeted that you're asking for like a ticket to that game that was reasonably priced. Did you get into that game? Were you able to watch that on hand?
So I did have a couple people reach out. Uh, and I ended up, I had made plans with one of my best friends since I was like 6 years old to meet up somewhere before I got those offers. And I kind of made the deal in my head that if I can get a ticket for me and Nick, then we'll go together. And reasonably priced for me that day was like $500.
Yeah.
And I even had one that was basically offered for face value because they had someone just couldn't make it, and they're like, "Hey, and I ended up turning it down just to hang out with him." And I think I probably had a better time
Wow.
hanging out with him all night because it's one of my, literally, it's a guy I've been really good friends with since I was a little kid. I grew up in New Orleans, so the game was there. So I felt like I got to feel more like I was at home than at a game. Uh, and you know this from covering sports for so long, we get a little spoiled
Sure.
where, like having credentials to things, it can just feel a little like work when I'm at a game sometimes. Whereas if I'm hanging out with a friend watching a game, it doesn't feel like work. So,
Well, how hard is it, Sam, to sort of and give that moment where you can turn the switch off? Because it's in this business, it's always on. Even when you're not working, you're always thinking about the next show, or you're thinking about what you can add to a segment. So, how hard is it for you to flip that switch and give yourself a moment?
I think it depends. So I've become a much bigger Liverpool soccer fan
Oh,
in my last 15 years than I ever was a fan of any soccer team before. And I think it's because, I didn't really cover much soccer while I was working. So it was that I could watch a team as a fan and completely disconnect. I actually had this conversation last week with somebody I work with, um, that I was talking about watching an LSU game, and they were talking about watching a Bears game, and they were like, "Yeah, it felt like I was trying to see, I was building a highlight in my head almost." I'm like, "Yeah, that's really how it feels," and it's not. I don't think it's even something you can avoid a lot of times for a regular season game. If it's like a big game. So I grew up a Cubs fan as well, because in New Orleans, WGN was one of the first cable stations. And I was a kid, so I'd watch the Bozo show. And the Cubs only played day games at home back then. So after the Bozo show, it was the Cubs. And it was, Ryan Sandberg, Andre Dawson, Sean Dunston, like an awesome team to be a fan of. So when the Cubs were making that World Series run that year here, that was amazing. One of the best moments of my life with my kids is I got to bring them to the World Series parade.
wow.
And that's the screensaver on my phone is it's them just looking super happy in their Cubs gears like little kids. I don't think they realize it's probably a once in a lifetime thing. But so I think I think big moments like that I can disconnect and be a fan. But I think if it's a regular season, if it's any of the big four sports here, it all almost always feels a little like work.
Well, how do you get your validation and how do you balance that between if you're to break it down like in a pie chart, work is some validation, but then to describe that moment with your kids and the
Yeah.
validation you get from your sense of self, how do you break that down and where that comes from?
Uh, I think it kind of goes back to just the moments in my life that you look back on as to kind of when was I happiest, and it was it's times with family, times with friends. There's key moments in my life. A lot of my key moments in my life are more like funny stories around them. Like I overslept for my college graduation because I was out having too much fun with my friends the night before. So, and I woke up when my little brother called me and asked me if I was coming to my graduation.
Oh
So
my
like my whole family was there, and I show up, like 20 minutes late.
God.
Uh, like I remember those things, and I look back at them like and laugh. A lot of people probably can't laugh at themselves like that, but you know, I think it's hilarious. uh, so yeah, I think it's those things. It's I look at anyone in life should just look at whatever makes them happy, and that's where they should get their validation from. Is if it's from them, my youngest kid loves Fortnite. If he gets a victory royale, he is bouncing off the walls. So like, hey, if that's what makes you happy, good for you. Find ways to make yourself happy. Uh, like right now in my life, I am happy when my kids do well playing sports. I'm happy even when, like my oldest son loves Pokemon Go. If he catches a crazy Pokemon that's rare and he
Oh,
starts flipping out, like those are the places I think I get validation is seeing the people around me succeed. I tell everyone that works for me too, if they get another job, I'm happy for them if it's a upward mobility thing. And I'm happy for them even if it's not, but then I'm like, okay, well, what did I do wrong if they're leaving for like an equal position? Um, but about probably a year ago, I had a kid had been a part-time PA for me. He got promoted. Sorry, my computer link keeps going to sleep. He'd been promoted to a full-time PA and did that for about a year and a half. And then we promoted him to AP, and it's just because we had the ability to. He had probably been ready to be an AP after like 3 weeks of being a full-time PA. But then about 4 weeks in, he came and gave me his notice because he got a job as a producer somewhere else, and he felt awful. And I was like, "No, Steven, that's awesome. Like, I'm happy for you. That means that I did my job and helped you grow. Like, I don't care if people progress their career with me. I just hope that in the future people can look back kind of like me with, like I mentioned Steve and Jacques and James earlier. Like I hope someone in their career down the line looks back and says, "Oh yeah, Sam Hale made a difference in my life and my career." There's several guys that intern for me now that are really successful, and I'm just as proud of them as I am of my own successes. There's a guy, John Arnold, interned for me in Dallas, and he's one of the biggest soccer writers for American and Mexican soccer now. And like, once I saw he had a newsletter, first thing I did, let me subscribe.
Wow.
Uh, and you had Arnie Spanier on previously. Arnie was a regular guest on our show in Dallas. And in Arnie's like going away segment that we did, John's in that as JTI, John the intern. So, those are the things I look back on. There's another guy, Harold Kuntz, is a reporter in Kansas City. There's a bunch of guys that I look back on, and I'm just super proud that I was just a small part in kind of their career developments.
And we started this conversation, Sam, and it was all hail Sam Hale, but you take so much pleasure in hailing others, which is really neat in a business that oftentimes can be so singularly internally focused, that you've been able to sort of show that it's not just about your individual steps that you take in your career, and that you get so much satisfaction in seeing others succeed around you. I got one more question for you. And Sam Hale with Stadiums with the I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel. What do you still want to learn?
Um, I think kind of like everyone, I'd like to move up in my career. I'd love one day to be running a network. I'd love, uh, I think you're always learning whatever you're doing. Um, so I think it's just learning more I don't think it's so much learning, as more as kind of seeing how everything goes, if that's the best way to put it. I look at it, if my career ended now, I've won awards, I've gotten recognition, and I've helped other people advance in their careers and learn. I think it's just kind of seeing where the ride takes me, and that sounds very cliche, and I hate cliche answers as a show producer, because I've gotten so many. Well, we all put our pants on one leg at a time. Answers. Uh, but yeah, I think it's kind of seeing where my career can progress, where this industry is going to go. I think TV sports is changing every day, um, and kind of wanting to just stay on kind of the forefront of that.
Well, it's been a fun journey for you, and it's been so cool seeing the way in which you've navigated and maneuvered your career, from the kicker you were in high school to coming back to LSU to working in the oil business, only to realize that maybe you would get your fuel from somewhere else. And you did in sports media. Sam Hale with Stadium. I'm Bryan Fenley with Tennis Channel. Thank you so much, Sam. This was a whole lot of fun.
For sure, Bryan. I'm honored you had me on. Thank you. And I'd call it a non-kicker instead of a kicker.